3 people walk into an ER with stomach pain. One has food poisoning, one has a gunshot wound, one is pregnant and in labor. If you use the same treatment for all 3 people, you're probably going to lose 2 of them. 3 kids walk into a youth treatment facility with anxiety and aggression. One has food insecurity, one has lack of predictable safety, one has lack of predictable survival partners. If you use the same treatment for all 3 people, you're probably going to lose 2 of them. I'm Kelly Rhodes with Body and Behavior Institute. Youth in corrections don't throw punches 24 hours of every day. If I get a youth in my milieu who throws down over not having the same number of tater tots on his tray as the kid in front of him, I know this youth might be more likely to have a history of food insecurity. And this kid, who doesn't notice or care whether he has as much food on his tray as the others, escalates over being moved from cell to cell. He's more likely to have experienced this. Think homeostasis. If we see a person with wrinkled, tacky fingertips, we know they've been in water long enough for their body to generate the adaptation. We don't look at someone with wrinkled, tacky fingertips and tell them they haven't been in water long enough to generate the adaptation. Their body designs the adaptation based upon that individual's survival experiences. Since survival experiences are the biological origin of emotion and behaviors, let's take a closer look at survival experiences. Survival experiences can be broken into 2 primary components: survival resources and predictability. First, let's look at survival resources. Think of survival resources on a 5-tiered hierarchy: food, safety, safe shelter, survival partner, well-resourced survival partner, and a survival purpose. If any of these resources is missing, our survival systems generate emotions, which enlist behaviors to meet that missing survival need. Not any emotion and not any behavior. The emotion is specific to the missing survival resource, and the behavior is specific to the missing survival resource. Now let's talk about predictability. If we have a person and their body perceives the need for nutrients, their stomach experiences sensations of emptiness, they feel hungry. These emotions prompt that person to get food. If in response to that prompt, his body receives food, his neurocircuitry will record that experience. If that happens consistently, his survival systems learn that food is predictably available. And the capacity to predict the availability of our survival requirements is so important to our survival that the human body devised a system to track the predictability of the resources it needs to survive. It does this through spikes and dips in the baseline level of dopamine. So it asks or prompts, and it gets. And it asks and it gets, and it asks and it gets. And each time it gets, just after it prompts, there's a little spike in dopamine activation. This spike in dopamine activation, just at the time of receipt of the survival resource, is the dopaminergic system's way of saying, okay, we're good. And it does this with air and water and food and safety and safe shelter and all of the survival resources. So a youth who has experienced his food, safety, and shelter and survival partners to be predictable, his survival system is satiated. It's calm, peaceful. But what if we have a body that sends out that prompt for food and food doesn't come when the survival system expects it? Well, instead of a spike in dopamine activation, we see a dip in dopamine activation. So it prompts again. Let's say it doesn't get it again. It will prompt again with more intensity. Every time the survival systems prompt, without receiving the resource, it tracks that resource as unpredictable. Our body's survival systems track the predictability of survival resources on purpose. and they generate emotions and create behaviors in response to that predictability or unpredictability on purpose. This survival system is trying to predict whether this body will be able to survive this environment now and into the future, and what behaviors will help make that happen. The survival systems have to experience the resource being there the moment it expects it, the moment it makes the prompt. Or it says, I can't predict we will survive this environment. So until that survival system experiences this survival resource to be predictable, it continues to increase the intensity of the prompt. Anxiety is one of these prompts. Anxiety is one of the first symptoms of a survival system in distress. Anxiety is a symptom of dehydration, oxygen deprivation, heat stroke, hypothermia, and danger. Mainstream youth's survival systems establish predictability through this dopaminergic tracking system during infancy and early childhood. But until that predictability is neurologically established, until that dopaminergic tracking system has experienced the survival resources to be available at the moment it prompts, until that neural circuitry is created, the survival system's whole job is to establish this survival resource predictability. So we have this young person whose survival system and dopaminergic tracking says, yep, we're good. His survival systems do not generate anxiety. His survival systems generate calm, peace. They're not preoccupied with their own immediate survival. So he can look around at what others might need. This youth helps his family, his friends, his neighbors. People say, he's such a good kid. And this young person, his survival systems are saying, we don't know if our food is predictable. Until this kid's dopaminergic tracking system experiences food to be predictably available to him, his survival systems give him a task. Find a situation where food is predictable. Not a lot of food once in a while, but every time the body prompts for nutrients. His survival systems are prompting him with emotions, feelings, and behaviors. And this homeostatic prompt is like a hum in the background of everything he says and does. We've got him learning math and history, but in the background, his survival systems have given him a much more urgent and crucial task: find predictable food. And the same is true for safety. If this child's survival systems experience parents fighting over bills, if the family's been evicted, if they move from shelter to shelter, if this youth experiences domestic violence or is abused, his survival systems give this youth a task: find predictably safe shelter. Not shelter that's occasionally safe, but predictably safe shelter. And that continual homeostatic prompt is like a second hum from a different generator in the background. He can't turn this incessant prompt off any more than you can turn off your wrinkle-tacky fingertips. And the find predictable food hum and the find predictable safety, safe shelter hum are very different hums. They are incessant and discordant in the background of everything this kid says and does. He goes to bed with this hum. He wakes up with it in the morning. He walks to school with this hum, this survival sensation, this anxiety, this angst. He walks through the halls of his school with these sensations. He sits in class with them. And because his survival systems perceive his survival to be at risk, all it takes is a subtle threat, even a status threat, and his survival systems respond with a preset behavior. He hits a classmate or a teacher, and he's court ordered to come see us. If I get a youth referred to my milieu for theft, I know I'm probably looking at a kid with neural circuitry for lack of predictable food. This is the kid that's more likely to get into a screaming fist fight over not having the same number of tater tots on his tray as the kid in front of him. We think it makes no sense. This is contextual adaptation. His body is adapted to his environment, not your environment, not mainstream youth's environment. His survival systems have been struggling to establish food predictability unsuccessfully for 15 years. Every experience, every cue relevant to making this survival resource predictable is worth a restraint. It already is a survival event to him. And if I get a youth in my milieu picked up for fighting, aggression, assault, I know I'm probably looking at a kid whose survival systems experienced lack of predictable safety. This is the youth who is more likely to escalate when people are loud, when staff shout or get forceful or unpredictable, when there's frenetic movement in the milieu, or inconsistent application of program rules, if staff don't stick to the schedule that gets him from moment to moment through his day, or if he's asked to change his cell too many times. And too many times isn't defined by what staff think, but by the organs and systems of that youth. His survival systems are fighting for predictable safety, fighting for the neural circuitry of predictable safety, fighting for the body state of predictable safety. And the best way to help that youth change their emotions and behaviors is through specific experiences. The youth who comes in swinging fists and threatening everybody, it's important to give him consistent experiences of predictable safety at the moment his survival systems prompt for it. And he quits throwing fists. We get to see his happy, playful self. And the youth who escalates over food, we need to give him consistent experiences of predictable food. And we see this youth start to relax, even around food. I've watched this happen hundreds of times. Many of you have as well. If we use the same treatment to reduce anxiety and aggression, for the youth whose anxiety and aggression spike in response to cues of food insecurity, and the youth whose anxiety and aggression spike in response to cues of lack of safety, and the youth whose anxiety and aggression spike in response to cues of lack of survival partner, we'll likely see these youth again. Usually for the same offenses that got them sentenced to the treatment the first time. If you're interested in learning more about contextual adaptation, I've placed links in the description. I'm Kelly with Body and Behavior Institute. If you found value in this video, please give it a thumbs up or subscribe.